my movie people, this is Stacia, and I'm just a girl on the internet that likes to talk about movies. And this is the next installment of our Stephen King Halloween for this year. So we're going to talk about today the 1983 movie, The Dead Zone. The Dead Zone was directed by David Cronenberg. And at this point, David Cronenberg was an up-and-coming horror director. So it made a lot of sense for him to direct a movie based on a Stephen King novel. He had at this point success with the movie Scanners, the movie The Brood. And in 1983, though this movie had not come out yet, Videodrome came out and was a complete failure. He had been given more money at that point to make a movie than he had ever been, and it ended up bombing. But Videodrome did not come out until they started filming The Dead Zone. So The Dead Zone would now become the movie where he was given the most money to make a horror movie. He was given about $10 million to make this movie. And David Cronenberg, in his Canadian filmmaker style, although I wouldn't call The Dead Zone a Canadian movie, it is filmed on location in Canada. Now, the movie The Dead Zone is based on the 1979 Stephen King novel of the same name. And it was his first novel to reach #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. So, of course, at this point, there's been a lot of success with Stephen King books made into movies, and so of course this was a hot commodity. At first, it was bought by Lorimar Pictures, and it was developed, and they had even hired the director at this point, Stanley Donen, who was a classic 1950s movie director from that era. He directed such things as Singing in the Rain, Funny Face, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, and Charade. Looking at that, it doesn't seem like he would be the right choice, but that's what Lorimar Pictures wanted at the time. But Lorimar Pictures actually starts going bankrupt in the early 80s, and they dismantled their film division, and that is when the rights get sold to Dino De Laurentiis, the famed movie producer, and he starts putting his team together to do this movie, which does not include any of the people that were already put together by Lorimar Pictures, except for screenwriter Jeffrey Boam. So they took the screenplay that he wrote, which none of them were too happy about. They gave a chance for Stephen King himself to rewrite it. When David Cronenberg got hired, he didn't like the Stephen King version, thinking it was too brutal. And they end up going with Jeffrey's screenplay. And this happens to be the first film of David Cronenberg's that he had no hand in writing the screenplay for. If you're used to David Cronenberg's movies, it's a departure from his style that he had at that point. But the basic storyline of The Dead Zone is Johnny Smith wakes from a coma after several years, and when he wakes up, he discovers that he has sort of psychic powers. He has the ability to foresee future events. But in the years since he's been in a coma, you have the storyline where before he had the accident and went to a coma, he was in love. He was about to marry his girlfriend, all of that left behind, and grappling with that past. So Johnny Smith is played by Christopher Walken. David Cronenberg originally wanted Nicholas Campbell, who is in the movie as Frank Dodd. And Steven Spielberg himself envisioned Bill Murray as the lead character. Dino De Laurentiis wanted more of a named actor at the time, and Christopher Walken, he is a legend now. But back then, he was a huge bankable star, coming off of winning an Oscar for The Deer Hunter. He was the bankable star that they needed to ensure this movie was a success in their mind. This also was distributed and produced by Paramount Pictures. So they were looking to hedge their bets with with somebody who would possibly get people to come to the movie theater to watch this. Although they were also banking on it's one of the most popular Stephen King novels to come out at that point. This movie also stars Brooke Adams, who was kind of a big deal back then. She plays Sarah Bracknell, who is Johnny's girlfriend that he missed out life on because of the coma. Tom Skerritt plays Sheriff Bannerman. Herbert Lom plays Dr. Sam Wyzek, who is the doctor who takes care of Johnny Smith. You have Anthony Zerbe as Roger Stewart, Colleen DewHurst as Henrietta Dodd. Martin Sheen plays Greg Stilson. And like I said, Nicholas Campbell is in here playing Frank Dodd. Those are the main characters of the movie. And besides being about Johnny waking up from his coma and having these visions of future events, it is also a murder mystery movie. So it's not a horror movie. It's more of a supernatural thriller type movie. So 3 movies based on Stephen King's books came out in the year 1983, and they were Cujo. They were this movie, The Dead Zone, directed by David Cronenberg, and the third one is Christine, directed by John Carpenter. So 1983 was quite a big year for works based on Stephen King novels. And this is one of those Stephen King works that does take place in the town of Castle Rock, which does include Cujo, which this movie kind of has a thread to, because the character of Frank Dodd is said to be the spirit that inhabited the dog Cujo that set him off on his murderous events. Even though chronologically the books came out with Cujo coming out after The Dead Zone, but which they don't really lend itself to that storyline really. It's really the thread tied in the books. But this movie does come out a couple months after Cujo came out in 1983. But the other books based in Castle Rock that Stephen King did were, of course, like I said, Cujo, Stand By Me, The Dark Half, and Needful Things. And this movie did okay at the box office. Like I said, this budget is around $10 million, and it made just over $20 million at the box office. So it does make its money back. But it is the first movie to come out based on a Stephen King book that's not a runaway hit. And that is a theme with the movies of his that came out in 1983, that they were hits, but not huge hits like the previous films that came out based on his works. So this is when you start to see a little downturn in the Stephen King movie hype. But this is a return to form where the movie is very critically acclaimed, and that is thanks large in part to the direction of David Cronenberg. Like I said, it is a departure from his other works. You watch this movie, and if you don't know it's a David Cronenberg movie, you wouldn't guess that it is. Also, by the performance of Christopher Walken, he was very good in it, and the movie is a very, tightly told. They cut out a lot of the extra stuff that was in the book that wouldn't weave well to a cohesive movie story. I always say, books that are based on movies, people complain, the book was better. They're totally different mediums, and you have to tell the stories different. If you ever see how big a Stephen King book actually is, especially this one, you can't fit that into a cohesive, tight, under 2-hour movie and keep audiences' attention to that, like you could maybe in a book where people read that on their own time. And yes, critically acclaimed, but it wasn't deemed Oscar worthy enough. But it was nominated for a bunch of Saturn Awards. And the Saturn Awards are the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and horror films. And in 1984, this movie was nominated for several of those awards. It was nominated for 4 of them, including Best Writing, Best Director, Best Actor, and Best Horror Film. And it wins in the Best Horror Film category. But will you still like The Dead Zone today? So I watched it recently again to do this video, and I think it really holds up if you look at it as a supernatural thriller. You can't go in expecting a horror type movie because although it is in that genre, it is not the stereotypical movie of that genre. And if you're going in wanting to see a typical David Cronenberg movie, you might be disappointed because, like I said before, this is not your typical David Cronenberg movie. But if you go into it just looking at a good supernatural thriller movie that happens to be based on a Stephen King novel, if you're not looking for it to be tried and true to the book, because like I said, they had to take a lot of things that are in the book out of this and sort of, narrow the storyline. So if you're just looking for a good supernatural thriller that is tightly told, well directed, and well acted, you will probably like the movie The Dead Zone, like I did. But thank you for watching this installment of my Stephen King Halloween series. My name is Stacia, and as I've said before, I am just a girl on the internet that likes to talk about movies. And if you like movies as much as I do, I invite you to subscribe to the channel if you want to. But don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and comment on the video. That really helps the channel out. And I would love for you to stay and talk about movies with me. But see you next time. I love you all. Bye.